Our first keynote speaker of the day is an Associate Professor of Religious Education and Head of the School of Human Development at Dublin City University. She teaches modules in religious education and pastoral ministry at undergraduate and postgraduate levels and supervises PhD research in these areas. As Director of the Irish Centre of Religious Education, she engages with policy developments in RE, supports teaching and learning in various contexts, and builds international research networks. She has been a keynote speaker at many national and international conferences. Her keynote topic is "We Teach Who We Are," drawing on the curriculum as a source of wisdom for ourselves. She has travelled back to Aotearoa twice in 1 week, so please, homai te piki paki paki, and welcome to the stage, Dr. Sandra Cullen.
I feel I'm having a Taylor Swift moment. Thank you very much. And my name is Sandra, not Joe, but we'll be all right. Thanks, Sonny. It's kind of awesome. I've never been in a group this big. So then, those many keynotes, like it might have been 5 people in the room, but anyone in third level, you have to claim everything. Diagwit, Garamila Mahagut. It is an absolute honor and privilege for me to be here. Twice. Rosalie contacted me probably 2 years ago now, and we had some conversations about the possibility of me coming to this beautiful country. With the planning team and Cullen is here somewhere, Cullen McLeod, we talked about what I might do here this morning. I'm not an expert on New Zealand. I'm not an expert on your schools. I am not an expert on your curriculum. I'm not even an expert on my own. But sometimes it's no harm for somebody from outside to come in and to reflect with a group as to what's going on underneath the surface. I'm going to use the word teach quite a lot, but I'm going to mean it in that very broad sweep. All of us are involved in the enterprise of education. Whether we clean the schools, whether we balance the budget, whether we teach, whether we're counselors, whether in management, whether in governance, all of us are involved in the ministry of teaching. The blurb for this morning, which we may or may not actually do, depending on how the Spirit moves, describes the session in the following terms. Curriculum can be described as the set of stories that one generation chooses to tell the next. But the stories get told explicitly and implicitly. We can distinguish between the stories we tell, the formal curriculum, the textbooks, what we're supposed to do, and how we tell them, the methodologies we use, the relationships that we have. However, I want to borrow Parker Palmer's phrase, because I just love it. We teach who we are. Bottom line, what do you remember about school? I bet it was the teacher. Hopefully not the teacher who told you how useless you were at maths. Hopefully it was the teacher who just affirmed something in you and you remember how they made you feel. That's about the quality of relationality. We're going to reflect a little bit on that. So we teach who we are. I'd like to suggest that at the heart of curriculum then is us. We're the storytellers. And what does it mean to be a storyteller? Supporting the storytellers, the teachers, the leaders, is key to the success of curriculum. We've all seen dead curricula, no matter what the subject we teach. You know the one. Your heart sinks. The curriculum is rubbish. The textbooks are rubbish. The continuing professional development is rubbish. And then I don't know if you have exam systems that the kids are supposed to go through, and you're going, what was that? The cross themes of the curriculum, holiness, grace, wisdom, justice, prayer, are woven throughout what I'm doing this morning. At times I'll call attention to them, but trust me that they guided my own preparation. I think that these are absolute sources for what it is we do when we engage with curriculum. And how do we do that authentically and with integrity? So, let's get to it. If you have a pen, take it out and a bit of paper. If not, do this in your head. We've all gone beyond bringing notebooks, haven't we? So, for those of you who like the old-fashioned pen and paper, now's your opportunity. So here's the question for you. Who are you? Draw a little figure, or imagine a little figure, and jot down keywords that say who you are. There's lots of those conversations these days. Oh, yeah. Who are you now? Who are you? Now, to wake you all up, have a chat with somebody around you, maybe even turn around in the seat so you're not necessarily talking to the buddy that you came in with, and tell them who you are. Just in a minute. Okay. So, how many people learned a fact about somebody else? Yeah, you learned a fact about somebody else. Is that what you wrote? Did you write facts about yourself? One word? I am a woman. I am Irish. I am married to Bernard. I have 2 children, Aisling and Connor. I live in Dublin. I work in DCU. Were they the types of identifiers? Okay. Now, I'm going to suggest that behind every one of those identifiers is a story. So I'm going to invite you now to think of one of the things that you said about yourself, and think for a moment about what story would you tell about that. You don't have to go deeply meaningful and personal just yet. Right? You know the way you always just go to the level you're comfortable with. But tell a story then to somebody that is behind the word. Everyone thought of a story? Right, tell a story to somebody beside you. Okay, I'll draw you back. Okay, opened a can of worms there, really, because I could just leave now. It'd be grand. Right. Think about what was the difference between the word and the story. Because lots of us had the same words, I bet. If we did this, you get a great lesson out of this, right? If we did this, we could see all the commonalities. But when we start telling the story behind the words, then our differences and our diversity come to the fore. Think of one of the stories behind a word. Who would you trust with that story? Who would you not trust with that story? Would you tell that story to everybody? Would you stand up here and tell the world? Would you do as Tim did yesterday and reveal something deeply personal? What stops us from telling stories? It stops because we reveal. And what does it mean to reveal? It means to tear back the veil. Revelation, tear back the veil. And if we reveal, then we're pulling back the veil, pulling back the curtains, and we're revealing something of ourselves. And when we start revealing ourselves, we're revealing our vulnerabilities. We teach who we are. We come with our vulnerabilities and with our great strengths. Now, in teaching, we always end up knowing our great vulnerabilities, because it's only at the end of the year and you get the nice card that goes, "You were the best teacher ever," But it's the one you get a few years later, 7 years on, and a kid comes back and says, "Do you remember when you said?" And somewhere within you're going, "I hope I remember the kid." Right? So we have an identifier. We have the words. So let's think of that in terms of curriculum. There are words in the curriculum. Great words, but they're words. What we want to look at and try to get to as the storytellers are the stories behind the words, the depth structures behind a word like incarnation, salvation. Yeah, we have that for breakfast every morning. Well, what's behind that? So that's who am I. When we start thinking about who are we, I think we're on dangerous territory. So look at the title of the conference. Together, one faith community. Together, one faith community. So community assumes something in common, a common purpose, some form of identification with a group, some form of being together, some form of sharing an ideal. But what if you don't? What if it's just not making sense to you at the moment? So you're there, you're identifying as Catholic, and part of you is going, "I've no clue what I'm doing here. I've no clue." Or am I the only one? No, okay. So that the days when none of it is making sense. It's a bit like, when you look through a kaleidoscope and all the little colors are all there, and every now and again you get it just right and the pattern is beautiful. You've all had those moments in your life when everything makes sense and you go, "Yeah, I get it." Listen, it only takes one little knock and it's all gone again. So when we're talking about one faith community, I think we have to be careful that we're not talking about sameness. We've something in common, but we're not all the same. Part of the problem, though, I think, is we get stereotyped. "Oh, well, you would say that, you're a Catholic teacher. Of course you'd say that." And you're going, "No." So this stereotyping, it happens all of the time. We're in a really uncomfortable place in Ireland at the moment. Everything is falling apart. I'm not being a naysayer, but it is just falling apart on our watch. And it's really difficult to identify as being a Catholic educator. because assumptions are made that, oh, well, you supported the bishops in their handling of the child sex abuse. Yeah, you disagree with this, and this. You were on the wrong side of history and everything. Right? So that pain that comes from being stereotyped is part of the story that we're telling about the community. The title of the curriculum, as I now mangle the title, To Tatau Whakapano. Anyway, our faith, well, you know what it is. It can sometimes alienate us because I'm not always sure that I share the our faith piece. And how do I negotiate that? I think that's the task for us as the storytellers, because that's when the kids and their parents see right through us. How do we integrate the depth structures of curriculum even when we find some of the words alienating? I'm thinking of my own struggles, ongoing struggles. I'm 62, born the same year as the Vatican Council, and we're still trying to figure all of that out. And we're still trying to see how that unfolds and what God is revealing through it all. So my struggles, I think, are the struggles of the church. That's a bit of a big claim, actually, as I say it out loud. You know the way sometimes you don't know what you're thinking until you've said it? Yeah. But I'm just remembering at 19, being part of a group of women praying the morning prayer of the church. And week after week, we said, Lord Jesus, we are your brothers. And I'm looking around this group of women, going, why are we saying we are your brothers? And I'm not buying that it means everybody. Right? A lot of us are invisible when we use that language. And we look at what has happened with the translation, the new translation of the Missal. And half of us are left out again. Okay? So the struggle with identifying with a system where I often just feel invisible. And that's somebody like me who's well able to stand up and speak for myself. I felt it most recently. I was at the ordination, or one of my friends was ordained bishop, or consecrated bishop recently. And sorry, I'm going to be disrespectful. But 80 or 90 very fine men in white dresses processed up the church. And you're going, why couldn't we have the archbishop and the man to be ordained? Why did we have to do that when this is the whole congregation is part of this? So those alienating moments. Now, that's speaking for women. I think laymen can often feel very alienated in churches as well, right? This is not all negative, don't worry. And it's not church bashing either. I think another way that I came across in preparing was this. So it's on the website, all right? And I just thought this was a really powerful way of thinking about our faith. This kotui, the lacing, stitching, and weaving of different elements. So we had a lovely workshop yesterday with Katie and Jared on this weaving idea of life and faith. I listened to the cry of the tui bird calling, tui, 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 let it be woven above, woven below, woven outside, woven within. Weave with the threads of humanity, so that they may be heard in the dark veil of the night. The dark veil of the night, pull back the veil, reveal, so that they may be heard in the world. I go nowhere without this, because it reminds me, unless what we talk about God is about this, then it's an ideology. So it may be heard in the world. Bind together the strands of people who descended from great the Hawaki, from the far and distant Hawaki, to be one with those in the gathering place of spirits, and from there into the world of light, to the enlightened world. Behold the sacred breath of life. Is that how we gather? I think the hour might be that gathering into that sacred breath of life. And we'll talk in a little while about how that looks different to different people. One question, though, I had as I was running up here this morning, but if we talk about this weaving, Who decides the pattern? Who gets to call it? Who gets to decide what gets woven in and what gets excluded? And who gets woven in and who gets excluded? So while it's a very powerful image, we have to problematize it a little bit, especially in the case of justice. Who gets woven in, whose stories get told, whose get left out. Right. And so we go back to the origin, or one of the origins of the word religion. So religio, religare. One is to weave, but one I'm becoming, I used to really love that one, but in the last few years, one other interpretation is to moor. So I heard somebody talking about sailing yesterday. When you're out in a boat and you want to moor your boat, you have to find the right place to moor it. You have to judge the tides. You have to judge everything. You have to judge that the anchor will hold or the rope will hold. And where are you going to moor yourself? What are you for, as Tim said? Where are you mooring yourself? And we have to be really careful that we don't let the rope be too loose, because we'll just bob around. And if it's too tight, it's going to snap. So how do we balance that? And I think at different points in our lives, we balance that differently in terms of our connection into church, into the faith community. So let's move it on a little bit. Why do you teach? In Ireland, the standard response is June, July, and August. Why do we teach? And I know there's days we're going, why do I teach? And there's other days you know exactly why you teach. What do you want to teach? Why do you want to be involved in the educational enterprise? Throughout the centuries, since the beginning of time, and we know this from cave drawings, from the beginning of time, groups have educated their people to the practice of a way of life. It's been inbuilt. And why do groups do that? For survival. You teach your kids what berries to eat. You teach them how to make fire. You teach them where to hide, how to protect themselves, etc., etc. To have an identity. We're this tribe. We're not that tribe. And what does that mean to be part of a tribe, part of a family, part of a group? We teach because we want people to belong to a tradition. Or in our diverse schools, not necessarily to belong to my tradition, but out of my tradition, I want to offer you a vision of life. There was one of the Catholic archbishops in the States, and I can't remember who said it, and it was, we teach not because they're Catholic, but because we are. So we do things not because somebody else is Catholic or we're trying to make them Catholic, but it's coming out of the fullness of my vision that I want to offer. Not to make you like me, but because there is something that's worth knowing. We want to uphold a system of beliefs and values. That's embedded in our RE programs, but also in the whole school ethos, that there is a vision we want kids to go out with. We want our teachers and our managers to uphold that. We want to transform the world. I got into it. I thought I was changing the world. I had rubbish religious education in school. Absolute rubbish. And you know the arrogance of being 17? Well, I can do better. Went to college. By about 19, I was kind of, well, maybe I won't be transforming the world just yet. But we do that. That keeps us going, doesn't it? But it mightn't be the world. It might be, I am part of transforming one life. I have made a difference to one life. And that's what gets us up in the morning. We teach people to be more human. That's what Jesus did. The Irish playwright Aidan Matthews described, at one point wrote, Jesus reached down so deeply into his humanity that he found God there. Now, it's probably slightly heretical according to some of the early fathers of the church, but Jesus reached so deeply into his humanity that he found God there. Is that true of us? In our deepest humanness, God is present. So teaching people to be more human is revelatory. To live a life of value and purpose. And how about it just might all be true? Right? We spend our lives justifying everything, all the others, but it might just be true. And that's a risk worth taking. Gabriel Moran, the American religious educator, says, I and my people are not wrong. My way is not a false way. I know it is true for me because I have experienced it. I am going to show you a world that does exist. I want you to see that world because it is worth seeing. I invite you to join that way. I've seen it. Moses up the mountain. I've seen it. The woman at the well. Come and meet a man I met who told me everything I've ever done, except too many times. I've seen it, and I want to share that way with you. Now, that demands the storytelling. Because handing somebody a curriculum or a textbook or a lesson plan, and we need them, not knocking them, I'm not getting rid of content, anything like that, it's not going to say it. We see the way, and we're shown the way because of the quality of the person who's showing us and the way that they see us. So what is the way that Gabriel Moran talks about? I think it's a way of living that's deeply incarnational. So there we have that big word, incarnational. That God becomes one of us, and therefore our lives matter. Being human is of God, and being human matters. So all of life matters. But a word like incarnation only comes to life when we know it. So my mum, who sadly died last year, but she's a great woman, but wasn't given to sentimental language or even really faith or church or mass all that much, and kind of gave up on the grounds of ill health. Nothing wrong with the woman. But in her late 50s, I don't like crowds, never stopped her in shopping centres or going on cruises. But kind of had given, just didn't engage her at all. But prior to that, she had been involved in parish and was one of the first ministers of the Eucharist in our parish. And we were, at one point, 6, I'm the eldest of 6, and we all rocked up to Sunday Mass one morning, and she was the minister. And of course, we couldn't resist, and we went out one by one up to the poor woman. By the time she got to my youngest brother, she gave him communion, turned, put the ciborium back on the altar, and fled towards the sanctuary. And I went in after her. I was probably about 20, maybe at the time, and my brothers were roaring laughing. You know, thought this was hilarious. And I went in, and my mum, not given to these emotional type of outbursts or even being able to express that type of spiritual understanding, I said, are you all right? And she said, I get it. I get it. She said, you know that thing, about God becoming a person? And she said, I get it, because she said, as I was giving the body of Christ to each of you, I gave each of you life. She said, I gave you life in my body, and now I'm giving you life in communion. So I now understand incarnation in a whole new way. She gave us life through her body, and now she understood what God was doing in giving his body to us. Right? So getting in behind, you can use that, make it up to, your own mother. You have my permission. Do your kids ever say, how many cousins do you have? Because it's always good to attach a story to a real person, even if you're making up the person. Right? this one did happen. All my stories actually are true today. So what story do I want to tell? I want to tell the story that this way of living is worth living, with all its hiccups. And I don't think I'm failing at it, because sometimes the story isn't right. And each generation is a broadening and an expanding of God's vision for the world, I think. Anybody read Elizabeth Johnson? Yeah, okay. So that idea of that expansiveness of God. And we get glimpses, now and again, glimpses. Think of what women in the church have done by bringing women's voice, by including the voices of indigenous peoples into the life and the ongoing revelation of God. Oh, I'm going to skip that one actually for the moment, because we did this. Anyone who was with me yesterday, we don't need that particular piece. So if I'm talking about a story of faith, I suggested yesterday that we perhaps could better understand faith as a verb rather than a noun. There is a noun element of faith. There is a body of content. There absolutely is. So please do not hear me saying I'm getting rid of catechism or any other formula that we have as church, because they're actually important. But I think for us as educators to make sense of it, we get in underneath it. So faith as a verb, it's action, it's doing. You know, if we think of faith as a noun, we could say, well, here's faith. And isn't it lovely? And I can leave it over there, polish it up now and again, but I can just look at it. Whereas if faith is a verb, I'm living it, I'm doing it, I'm being it. And I mightn't always have to put the official words on it. Look what Jesus got in trouble for. He just lived. He didn't always speak the official language of the temple and of the synagogue. He lived something. So a colleague of mine, a former colleague of mine, Paddy Devitt, wrote about faith using the image of the immortal diamond. So let's think about diamonds for a minute. Multifaceted. We're all educators. None of us are ever going to own a beautiful diamond. But we can imagine. But a really good diamond has clarity and cut and the sparkle. And yet at its heart, it's carbon, it's dense, right? So it is shadow and light. But I like this image because I think it allows me, you know, on the days when you're saying, oh, I don't believe any of it, don't even know if I believe in God. But it allows us a way of going, but actually I do. I'm just not expressing it that way at this point in my life. Because the way I expressed my faith at 20 is very different to the way I express and live it at 62. I wouldn't even recognize my 20-year-old self. So each facet of a diamond reveals. So let's think of, I've added to Paddy's original list. So Paddy described one facet as worship, faith expressed in prayer and ritual. And for many, that is the heart of it, and it is life-giving. But what if you're feeling alienated from the prayer and worship life of the church for various reasons? Faith is intellectual, as understood and explained. If you've done theology, do you remember actually, trying to make sense of any of it? And every now and again, the light switch would happen. But that intellectual, and it's that really rich, 20 centuries of Christian reflection on God and the richness of that. And it is a bit of a head trip, and it's a great head trip. Prophetic. How does faith color my life? So I am drawing attention, because what did the prophets do? They were messengers. They drew attention to the beyond, and they challenged people to live differently. Eschatological. Faith is generating the future, that we have a hope. Do you know, at the moment when you turn on the news and you look at the rise of the far right and the hate in the world and the hate that is generated through the channels on social media and the fear we have and the fear of the pandemic. And the one, surprisingly, that got me was the attack on Capitol Hill in Washington. That I was so distressed that day. I'm not American, but it somehow became symbolic of this attack on freedom. So what do we offer? Faith is generating hope. Faith is moral. And some of us belong to a generation where morality and faith went so hand in hand that we didn't know how to it was all about the moral life. Faith is working for justice, the socio-political dimension of faith. Some days we do this all together, and sometimes we might spend a year only in one domain. The interreligious dimension as engagement with the many ways of responding to God. Do you know, there was a time people were burnt as heretics, and now we're able to say God reveals in the many, many places that God has created. And so we're able to incorporate practices from various religious traditions that expand our understanding of God. Faith as depth awareness, that deep consciousness. You know, the bit, it lasts about 30 seconds. You know, when everything just makes sense and you see, as the poet Patrick Hamlet says, you see into the life of things. And faith as being in relationship with others, the community dimension of faith. And faith as ecological. Faith as deeply connected with the life of the planet. Is it many diamonds? Some of us probably have rings where there's a couple of small diamonds. Notice the small. A couple of small diamonds. Or is it one big diamond? Is the community of believers lots of small stones sparkling in the room? Or is it one big diamond with many facets? You can play with that image. Yeah, Cantwell Smith, a Presbyterian theologian, describes faith as being deeper, richer, and more personal than any understanding of religion. We're very good at talking about religion. We're very good at talking about church. We're not very good at talking about faith. So I told the group yesterday, I was part of a family mass group preparing Sunday liturgies with children. And give or take, there were 9 of us, all women, all the mammies. And we knew far too much about each other's lives. Our husbands would not have been happy with some of the things that were shared. Not once did we have a conversation about faith. Not once. We talked about liturgy. We talked about religion and church, but never about faith. Why? Why was it easier to talk about sex than it was to talk about faith? And is that to do with we reveal too much? I hope people weren't revealing everything about their lives to me. But what is it that we just can't seem to trust people with the vulnerability that faith is? Faith is engendered by a religious tradition in some cases, and to some degree by its doctrines, but it is a quality of the person, not the system. It is an orientation of the personality to oneself, to one's neighbour, to the universe, a total response, a way of seeing whatever one sees and of handling whatever one handles, a capacity to live at more than a mundane level, to see, to feel, to act in terms of a transcendent dimension. So, now, here's a task. Think of your faith at the moment. You do not have to share this one. You're all right. Think of your faith at the moment, and we'll allow the tree to be faith. That can be expressed in any of the dimensions. It could be church, it could be scripture, it could be your faith community, it can be anything you want it to be. And as you look at that this morning, which child are you? That's a great little one. Just Google children in a tree and you'll find, but you could do all kinds of things with it. As I reflect this morning, I'm two of the children. Hanging, you'll see in the middle, the little boy with the dark hair, and he's reaching down to the little girl who's clinging on for dear life. And in the last 2 weeks, I've been both of those children. I'm clinging on for dear life, but I've also had to help my family through a time of grief. So we can be two at the same time, right? And then who's reaching out for me at the moment? Something like that might allow us to even start to reveal about why I'm only hanging on. And there's other days I'm that young boy with the baseball cap and I am up there, all right? Hopefully that's where most of you are. There's days I'm your man on the ground going, what? Who? Where? When we look around a room like this, what we understand is we need to move beyond a single story. There is no single story of faith. It's a collection of stories. Even Scripture is a collection of stories that tells a story. A number of years ago, I was walking through Dublin city centre, and there was a young woman, and she had a megaphone, and she was preaching about salvation and redemption and hell, and really we were all going to hell very quickly, etc., and everyone just scurried past her. She wasn't drawing anyone's attention. Well, or she was drawing attention, but nobody was staying to pay attention, all right? And we could tell our story that way. But another way of thinking about stories is my son is a musician, and he has the decks. Anybody? The sound mixing decks, all right? And all the levels, and I can't tell the difference between any of the sounds. But he spends hours unmuting and muting and balancing, and that all the instruments, everything gets moved around. So do we do that in our lives? What needs to be muted and unmuted at different points? And again, who does the muting and the unmuting? Because we always have to problematize that power thing. What do you want to turn the volume up on in your life? At this moment, what do you need to give attention to? Because we all trundle along, don't we? We're all in the groove. But what is calling for some unmuting in your life at the moment? So it's beyond single stories. You'll come across that in curriculum studies at the moment. I presume you've heard this. It's certainly big in social studies. And that idea of intersectionality, because none of us tell a neutral story. It is always coloured by gender, by race, by our socioeconomic background, by our cultural background, etc., family experience, place in family, we've all this intersectionality. So even my one story has many textures to it. Let's skip that one. So let's think about curriculum. One way to tell the story, so a church or an educational enterprise, a school, tells its stories through curriculum. What do we include? What do we exclude? So those of you who worked on the curriculum, so Cullen is the person I've been chatting to about it, what did you have to filter? Who did you have to listen to? Who did you have to keep happy? Who did you have to keep on board? All of the time remembering the child who is standing in front of you, because they are the focus of curriculum. Right? So if we look at curriculum as a set of stories then, is it a prescription? Is it a guide? Yes, if you only see curriculum as, here's curriculum, here's the exam, and do the learning outcomes match what's going to be assessed, etc. Say all that stuff that wrecks your head. No? You all love that, do you? Learning intentions, learning outcomes, assessment criteria. Get a group of teachers in Ireland and oh. We roll our eyes when we think about some of those things, right? Because so often we just go, who gets lost in that? Sometimes it's the kid who gets lost. But what if we think about curriculum as the set of stories we want to tell the next generation? And I think that you've managed to do that in the curriculum here. So while you read it, and you know, it's like any document, it's flat, sorry. But opening any document, it's flat. And our job as the educators is to unflatten it, all right? To give life, to breathe life into the words. Pienaar describes curriculum as a series of complicated conversations. I want to come back to conversation in a minute. Complicated conversations, because who owns the conversation? Who determines it? Is it the exam board? Is it the textbook writer? Is it the integrity of the teacher who's telling the story? Elliot Eisner writes about the various types of curricula that happen all in the same moment. The explicit curriculum, what we're doing, what it says on the tin. Right? So the curriculum, the textbook, etc., etc. It's very clear. Anyone can come in and assess. But then we have the implicit curriculum, which is the way we set up our classrooms, for instance. I mean, I am deeply uncomfortable up here with a microphone and this, because implicitly it's saying, I am the fountain of all knowledge here, and you are just sitting there lapping it all up. Now, there's something very wrong with that. I would much more comfortable, moving between people, getting people talking, all the rest of it, all right? But these folks paid for my flight for me to do this. But the implicit, what's happening in the room? What do the kids call you? Do you know all their names? Do you look people in the eye? What's on the walls? So all of that implicit. But Eisner calls attention then to the null curricula. What is it we are not even thinking about? Brought home to me a long time ago. I was teaching in an inner city school. I taught RE and English in an inner city school for 14 years. And before I got notions and moved into third level. But I remember one day there was a young African woman, and it was before migration, inward migration to Ireland was really happening. So she was kind of a bit unique in the school, this young black girl. She was 13. And one day she said, we have an agency called Throcra. So it's the social justice agencies like CAFOD or SCIAF, any of those. Caritas, I think, is yours. Yeah. So we're doing the Lenten program, and really powerful stuff. But she was getting more and more upset, and she said, Miss Cullen, why are all the black children always poor? It never occurred to me. Never occurred to me. There's plenty of black people in the world who don't need my charity. So what types of things are we not even aware of? And that somebody in the class will always say, yep. So that null curriculum. Curriculum is generally written in terms of the learners, but what about ourselves as learners engaging with the curriculum? How do we draw on it as a source of wisdom for our lives? And these are the cross themes. You'll notice I am kind of weaving them. Oh, how do we draw on it? When my children, Aisling and Connor, were small, we were heading up to Mass one morning. They were in the car seats in the back. Aisling was about 4, Connor was about 2.5. And Connor, where are we going? And the very sophisticated 4.5-year-old said, we're going to Mass. Oh, will we see God there? Says the 2-year-old. And the sophisticated 4-year-old says, no, God is invisible. What's imbibable? It's like when you get a yellow crayon and you draw on white paper, and most of the time you can't see it. But sometimes, in some light, you can. Now, hers was not quite as fluent, but that's what she was saying. Right? Sometimes you can see the yellow crayon. Right? Isn't that grace? I used this as an analogy. One time I was teaching a course on grace, creation, and eschatology, and we were doing Karl Rahner's Supernatural Existential. Anybody? Hands up if you can explain Karl Rahner's Supernatural Existential. And the young ones were looking at me as I was murdering Karl Rahner. So I explained it as the yellow crayon. The extern on the exams contacted me and she went, Sandra, just wondering, what's this about Karl Rahner's yellow crayon? She said, I've never come across that in Rahner, because all the students had written about Karl Rahner's yellow crayon when explaining grace. The 4-year-old understood this. Right? So that grace is there, we know that, but there are times when the light gets shone on it. So in our curriculum, in our telling of our stories in curriculum, we're shining light. Oh, this is something I'm playing with. This might not work. So the daughter who understands Karl Rahner's yellow crayon recently passed her driving test. It took about 22 years off my life. But one of the days, as I was sitting patiently, I began to think of this analogy and then began using it in terms of how we might frame what we're talking about this morning. That if we think about curriculum and about story and about faith, then maybe we can think of an analogy like this. Now, this could go really wrong. I haven't perfected it. That we have a curriculum which might be akin to the instruction book for your car. You know, the one that sits in the glove compartment and you only have to go to every now and again and go, oh, what do I do? Right? So it sits there. That might be like the curriculum. But the curriculum can't teach you to drive the car. We can look under the bonnet, which is what we're doing here today. We look under the bonnet of the car to figure out, well, how does it all work? Now, I don't know, if you're like me, you look under the bonnet and you pretend you know what you're doing, and you know about 2 things in there. But it's always good because then somebody, usually a man, will come across and try and mansplain to you what should be happening. So, under the bonnet. But we have to go under the bonnet every now and again. Right? But what's the ultimate aim? Is to get out on that road and to drive. And is that what living faith is? It's the driving of the car. We have the under the bonnet, which might be the theology for driving the car, and we have the rules, the instruction manual, which might be curriculum, it might be catechism, it might be church teaching, all right? But somehow all 3 are necessary, because if you just keep driving the car without knowing the rules of the road, you are in serious trouble. But knowing the rules of the road can't teach you to drive the car. You have to live it, you have to drive it before any of that makes sense. So anybody is free to develop that analogy, because I have to do a bit more thinking about it. So as we think about how we began this morning, the words are really, who you are. The words are really only a shorthand for the story we tell to make sense of an experience. On their own, the words mean very little. We are fixated in senior cycle religious education in Ireland on the search for meaning and values. If I hear the word search anymore, we're always seeking, always. But what's that shorthand for? It has to be about some point finding. Do you remember, and some of you are still at this stage, but being on the dating scene. And kiss a few frogs along the way, and at some point you have to go, he'll do. This is why my husband is never allowed to come into any of my talks. At some point, it's not about settling, it's about recognizing that you've found. Then you have to work it all out, but that you have found what you've been looking for. The wonderful thing about being Christian is the recognition that we have already been found. I formed you in the womb. I have known you since the beginning of time. We can spend our lives seeking, but we have to find, and we have to let ourselves be found. This was brought home beautifully a few years ago at a celebration of the first sacrament of reconciliation. And the celebrant had all the 8-year-olds up around the sanctuary area, and he sent them back to their seats after the homily. And he said to them, he said, you know, we only get God's hug through each other. So I want you to go back to whoever you're here with and give them God's hug. It's just gorgeous. Not a dry eye in the church. There was a very elderly visiting priest who had come in to help, and he was sitting over near me. And this little boy went over to him and hugged him. Now, it was a week or two after one of these awful reports about abuse in the church in Ireland. It was just after that had been published. And a father, I presume it was a father, came up, dragged the child away and said, "Don't touch that man." All right? So it was very distressing. And afterwards I met the priest, and I just said, "Are you all right?" And he said, he was crying, and he said, "That little boy came to me and said, 'Priest, you've no mammy and daddy here, so I'll give you God's hug.'" These are the stories behind redemption, salvation, incarnation, grace, holiness. Is all right? Okay. Now, curriculum is always seen as something that's done to kids. We always think curriculum is for them. I want you to do a little exercise. These are the phrases, the descriptors in the curriculum. All right? What if we said this about ourselves? I have. Because if this is what we want for our young people, then surely we have to be engaging with this. There's no test at the end, don't worry. I have some religious knowledge, skills, and experience, no matter what my function is in the education enterprise. I have a range of cultural identity, language, and understandings. I come from varying socioeconomic situations. I have a range of access and skills regarding technology to communicate, entertain, and learn. Sometimes don't you feel you're only entertaining? I approach religious learning and experiences with varying degrees of enthusiasm, indifference, interest, leadership, and participation, depending on whether it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. Look at that word enthusiasm. It comes from entheos, to be God-filled. The enthusiastic teacher is the one who is God-filled. It's a great, that was such a great insight for me. I have a range of understandings around social justice and fairness in the light of the gospel and according to my life experience. I have good days and bad days. The kids are allowed to have the good days and bad days. So am I. And I might have to go back in and apologize the next day to them when I have the bad day. I'm connected in varying degrees to my parish. I have a range of cognitive and affective skills and abilities. I'm part of schools, large and small, new and well-established, reflecting the social context of my community. I'm in need of quality religious education. No matter what stage I'm at, I'm in need of it, which supports my personal growth and the development of my authentic relationship with Jesus and with the church. I come from homes where my knowledge and commitment to faith practice is not always supported and reinforced. Hands up. I come from different kinds of wahanu and diverse experiences of love and care. I participate in some form of sporting and other cultural activities, and I'm on a journey of spiritual growth, which includes experiences of prayer and relationship with God. All of these, and many not listed above, influence people's engagement with stories of faith. Now, because I've spoken far too long, I'm skipping pieces. which is really about some of the contextual pieces that are going on. One I did want to draw attention, though, to, some of you will have come across the work of Lieven Boeve, the Belgian theologian and educator, and he talks about detraditionalization, pluralization, and the individualization of identity formation as kind of characteristics of the contemporary context. I would add 2 more pieces to it. I would talk about the flattening of horizons and a new utilitarianism. You know, education as qualification rather than anything else. But we can, you know, another year we'll do this. But one of the things a story that I wanted to tell was, it's not uncommon. We talk about syncretism sometimes as if it's a negative, but maybe it shouldn't always be seen negatively. Maybe it's about that expansive understandings that we have. A few years ago, I was working with a group of undergrads, and I invited them to bring a symbol that spoke of their meaning making, or their faith, whatever language they wanted to use around these depth moments. And it was really lovely. The number of them who brought rosary beads or prayer cards, you know, for after somebody has died, belonging to grandparents. That was where they connected their faith story, not with parents at all, in fact. But one young woman brought in a candle and explained that was her Reiki candle. She was practicing Reiki and was a trained Reiki master, as they call them. And she explained Reiki, and the rest of them were looking at her agog. When she finished her story, I said to her, is Reiki a religious practice for you? And she thought for a minute. She said, oh, I suppose it is. Because she said, when I light my candle, I pray to Ganesh. And when I'm finished the session, I say a Hail Mary. She identified as a young white Irish Catholic. So she was somehow drawing on all, so, you know, an old self might go, oh, for heaven's sake. But actually, she was trying to grapple with a depth, and she was trying to find a language for this. She is teaching religion in a Catholic school and is doing great. What it did draw my attention to, though, was the idea of religions being internal and fuzzy-edged. So there was a discussion about weaving life and faith. I'm not too sure we weave life and faith, actually. I used to think that, but I think it's just about shining the light rather than bringing pieces together. Oh. I want to just draw, I'm not going to do that one today, draw attention to this. I came across it during COVID, and I think it's a great description of what most of us are facing with, you know, let's put the antiseptic, let's fumigate religion out of, certainly this is our experience in Ireland. Religion is being eradicated from the public space. So we make everything so antiseptic that the power of religious faith actually can't engage us because we flatten it all out. And then this one, in Dubai airport. No, Singapore. I can't remember which airport now I was in. I think it might have been Singapore. But look at it. I thought, because we had lots of time, I said, I'll go to the prayer room. Look at the symbols. So you have the first aid. The big sign is for the toilets. You have first aid. You have the prayer room. You have the baby changing station, the accessible toilet, the shower, and the toilets. Now, part of me was furious. I was saying, look where they've put the prayer room, down with the bathrooms. And so I was getting all that angst about it. And then I began to think, well, actually, maybe we could flip that on its head and think of religion as with the necessities of life. Feeding babies, changing babies, excretion, and religion. Or faith. But actually, think of it in terms of the necessities of life. I'm not too sure that's what the architects were thinking, but I'm trying to put a positive spin on it. Because faith deals with the necessities and it deals with the yuck of life at times. Who are you? Back to where we began. Who are you? You could rewrite that list. You could draw your little figure again. And instead of the facts about you, what are some of the internal things about you? I am loved. I am connected. I am trusted. I am challenged. I am sent. I am called. I am inspired. I am welcomed. And who does that for me? And where do I find that support in my faith story? So when do we ever talk about faith? I'm going to skip through this. Oakeshott, the educationalist, writes about conversation. You know, we talk a lot about dialogue. I think we'd be much better to talk about conversation, the chat. Anyone have good chats last night? Yeah. And isn't that where the stories come out? Not in the formal things. The chats on corridors. Now, glass of wine always helps the chat. But with the kids, sitting on the bus going to a match, that's when the real stories start to happen. Education invites people into conversation with differing viewpoints, differing truth claims, and differing versions of what it means to be religious, to be educated, and to be human. The answers will not be the same. And sometimes we find it difficult when the answers and the stories differ. And we'd like us all to have the same response. We're going to just look at something. So, Kushla and Rosalie have been conscripted into this. So do you mind coming forward? Oscar-winning performance happening here now. They don't really know what they're going to have to do. I'll come back to the microphone in just a moment. So. Okay. Rosalie, where's the screen? Kushla, where's the screen? Rosalie, where's the screen? Behind me. Kushla, where's the screen? In front of me. Are you telling the truth? No. Rosalie, are you? No. Is this? Oh, there's always a smart ass. Always the smart ass. Okay, so the women are telling the truth. But their answers are wrong. They don't agree with each other. So Rosalie, will you turn around and face the screen? Kushla, where's the screen? It's in front of me. Rosalie, where's the screen? In front of me. Oh, isn't that lovely? They agree. They agree. Would you both like to turn around now and face the audience? And ladies, where's the screen? Yeah, do not. Do not. And it's behind. So and they now agree. What's our problem? What can we see? So what's your answer? It's in front. Okay, so we're all seeing and responding different. Now, you could play this game for hours, okay? You could have them standing on their heads. You could lying down. Doesn't matter. No, don't worry. So if they both have the same response, we go, isn't that lovely? But we're missing part of the story, okay? So what we have to do is allow for the perspectives. What's the one thing we can all agree on? There's a screen. Okay. So when we're ladies, thank you. So as we try to tell our stories, we do not have to tell one story. We are not diluting the truth. There is a screen. We're not diluting truth even as we allow for the different responses. As we get underneath the truths explained in the curriculum, as we get underneath that, we have to allow that there's going to be different ways of interpreting and naming that. So I am going to finish. I'm getting the glare. I could keep going. So, two little things I want to finish on. Mary Oliver, tell me, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? I came that you may have life and have it to the full. Your one wild and precious life. How do the stories help that? How do you tell your story of faith and this wild and precious life? And I think faith life is wild and precious. It really is. You know when you've had those moments of deep faith sharing with somebody and how absolutely alive you become. And then I have to finish with one of our most famous atheistic writers, James Joyce, and famously anti-Catholic. But look what he writes. And I leave you with this thought. Life is now. This is life. If I postpone it, I may never live. To walk nobly upon the surface of the earth, to accept myself without pretense, to acknowledge my own humanity. And if that's not deeply Catholic, I don't know what is. So thank you. You'll notice I'm not leaving time for questions. But I am around, so please chat. Yeah. Hi, Mike, how are you? Thank you.
I begin this acknowledgement, first of all, by giving the apologies of Bishop Michael, who's supposed to be standing here. He was called back this morning to the diocese on an urgent matter, and so he jumped on a plane, and you've got me. Not even a Hatapara, oh boy, I'm sorry. So Sandra, don't buy a lotto ticket, your luck's out. Can I just begin by acknowledging again the passing of your sister-in-law, Ruth, Sandra. You're amongst people that understands the cost of what you did this morning, because we have been called to educational leadership, and oftentimes our own family, because of that vocational call, takes a back seat because we are called to be somewhere and do something that no one else can do. And I acknowledge your husband who gets it, he gets your vocation and enables you to come to New Zealand, to fly back for the passing, and then to come back all within 1 week. So we understand that and we acknowledge it, and please pass on our thanks to your husband for his support to enable you to be with us. I just want to say one thing. It came from, I had the privilege of going to Sandra's workshop yesterday, and there was a quote that just whacked me between the eyes, and it said this: a religiously educated person is edified. I love that word. I didn't really know what it meant. Edified. Someone who has adopted a way of thinking about the world through a religiously informed lens. Yeah, we've been edified. We've been religiously and intellectually edified. Our faith has been developed and our understanding has been developed through this conversation with you, Sandra. And that enables us to be better spiritual guides and leaders of the students and the staff who are in our care. We can better accompany them, and we can only give who we are as spiritual beings to accompany someone else on their spiritual journey of their life. So Sandra, you are a personal source of wisdom, and we can draw on you and your guidance and your wisdom for our storytelling in our classrooms and in our schools. So on behalf of the group, I want to give a God hug to Sandra.